This is a legal matter, I guess, the biggest trial of the century, suing the federal government to protect future generations. Philip Gregory. Philip, welcome.
Thanks. Before I get started, I just would like to ask everybody again to give a round of applause to that inspiring and important panel that we just heard. They were genuinely incredible. Okay, who here in this room thinks that this Congress is going to do something to deal with the problem of climate change? Who thinks that that branch of government is going to do, this Congress is? Who here thinks this president is going to address climate change? So what we're left with, because we don't have a president that's going to do it, we don't have a Congress that's going to do it, we're left with our courts. And God bless our courts who are standing up to this administration and addressing what needs to be done. And one of the courts that are doing it is a district court in Eugene, Oregon, who is handling our case, a case that is no ordinary lawsuit. As Judge Ann Aiken, in her November 10, 2016 ruling said, our lawsuit is different from any typical environmental case, because what we're alleging and we're going to prove is that the government's actions and inactions, whether or not they violate a specific statutory duty, has so profoundly damaged our kids that they threaten our children, our grandchildren, and future generations the constitutional rights they have to life and liberty. So our case is on behalf of 21 plaintiffs who are suing the federal government, what the Washington Post has called the biggest trial of the century over climate change. In fact, a national legal publication just ran an op-ed yesterday. The heading was, will the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the same one that dealt with the immigration ban, rein in what might be the most important lawsuit on the planet? That's this case that I'm going to talk to you about. It's Kelsey Juliana versus the United States of America. It's in the District Court for the District of Oregon. It's being brought by 21 plaintiffs from around the United States. When we filed this lawsuit, they were all under age 20. We filed the case in August 2015. We've got kids from Alaska. We've got kids from Hawaii. We've got kids from Florida, New York, Colorado, Oregon. And one of them, Jaden, from Rayne, Louisiana, lives in an area where they're supposed to experience a flood once every 1,000 years. Once every 1,000 years. They're now on their second major flood in 3 years. And she woke up one morning, stepped out of her bed, and she was up to her ankles in climate change, because the causation of that flood is as a result of systemic fossil fuel emissions, as we're going to show. Jaden's one of our plaintiffs. Who are our defendants? Our defendants are the current rogues gallery right now. Okay, we've got President Trump, we've got Perry, we've got Pruitt, we've got Tillerson. They're all defendants in this case. And what are we suing them over, and what are we seeking? Well, we're seeking a judicial declaration that the aggregate actions, historical actions, and the current climate policies of the federal government violate fundamental constitutional and public trust rights. And what we want is a court order that's going to have two key measures. The first is a consumption-based inventory of CO2 emissions, and the second is that the federal government promptly prepare and implement a science-based climate recovery plan to phase out fossil fuel emissions. And the pattern for this case, the precedent for this case, the civil rights cases, Brown versus Board of Education, involved kids, and it involved science. And come up to me later if you don't understand how Brown versus Board of Education involves science. Also, for example, the prison reform cases and other institutional reform cases. So there's a lot of precedent on these types of cases. It just hasn't been brought in the environmental context. So what do we have? We have the public trust doctrine, and we've got constitutional protections. The public trust doctrine goes back to Roman times, and then it essentially states there are essential natural resources: air, running water, the sea, and that the sovereign or the state has a fiduciary obligation to preserve these essential natural resources for present and future generations. Public trust doctrine. The constitutional protections are grounded in the Fifth Amendment that guarantees citizens the right not to be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process, and also equal protection. So what are the claims? The claims are grounded in the fact, and we're going to have Naomi Oreskes as one of our experts at trial. They're grounded in the fact that the federal government has known for more than 50 years of the clear dangers of carbon pollution and the safe limits of atmospheric concentrations. I'm just going to show you one study. I like to wave things around. December 1983. Can we delay a greenhouse warming? This study by the EPA states unequivocally, and I'm not saying it's the first, it's one of many. It states unequivocally that we have to address climate change now being 1983, but we can't do it because we don't have the economic and political will to do what it takes to get rid of carbon and other fossil fuels. 1983. So the government has not only known for over 50 years, but the government has facilitated and subsidized, has permitted the entire systemic fossil fuel system to make our climate system incapable of sustaining human life. What do we have here? What we've got is reports to the White House. This report is to none other than Lyndon Baines Johnson. And the report, in essence, says that CO2 pollution is a huge, huge problem. In the Nixon White House, we have the science advisor, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, writing John Ehrlichman in September 1969. He's saying that what we're facing in climate change is essentially going to destroy our coasts. The highlighted part in the bottom, I know you can't read it, is this in turn could raise the level of the sea by 10 feet. Goodbye, New York. Goodbye, Washington, for that matter. That's what he's writing in 1969. We have a huge timeline of the government's long-standing knowledge concerning the danger. It's government reports, Dr. Jim Hansen's testimony before the Senate, and by the way, Jim is one of our plaintiffs in our case. He's serving as the guardian for future generations and will be one of our expert witnesses. So the government has known for years, and that these aggregate actions violate fiduciary obligations, violate the Fifth Amendment, and essentially put the burden on our youngest generation and future generations to address the problem. They did a cost-benefit analysis, and they found that future generations are better off bearing the brunt of climate change than changing then. So as Judge Aiken ordered, so the primary occurs On November 10, 2016, after the current president was elected, what she held is that if a court cannot address climate change because of the systemic problem, then the Constitution affords no protection to a government's knowing decision to poison the air, poison the water, but because she found that we have alleged a constitutional infringement, we're on a path to trial. And right now, I just want to make sure everybody is very, very energized by the role the courts are taking. Judge Ann Aiken spoke very firmly when she wrote, "A strong and independent judiciary is the cornerstone of our liberties." As she wrote, just as marriage, because Obergefell has recently come down, is the foundation of the family, a stable climate system is quite literally the foundation of our society, without which there would be neither civilization nor progress. A right to a climate system capable of sustaining human life is fundamental. It's a fundamental right. Since she issued her order, we've had the Trump inauguration, and the federal government's tactics in our case have changed. They're trying to get this case kicked out again and again and again. And every time the courts are saying, no, 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 this case is going to trial. In discovery and preparations for trial, there won't be able to come forward and put a witness on a witness stand with alternative facts, because alternative facts are perjury. Remember that. While Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement, he can't withdraw from this lawsuit. We're going to put the science in the courtroom, and we're going to make sure that the government has its opportunity to put its feeble arguments and its supposed science in the courtroom. As the government lawyers said when they were asked, where are your experts going to be coming from? I'm not making this quote up. They said, we're going to have to scour the earth to find some people who will testify in this case. Trial is January 2018. What can you do to help? Well, this case is being spearheaded by a nonprofit called Our Children's Trust. Our Children's Trust is based in Eugene, Oregon. But the one thing you can really do is talk to people about this case, particularly talk to your children, your grandchildren, because this case is a way for the youth of America to understand that the Constitution applies to them, that the Constitution will protect them. But we have to turn to the courts now in order to get that protection. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get the kids' voices to be heard. Just like this prior panel was talking about getting women's voices heard, and they talked in terms of mothers. Well, kids are not being heard. And if anything you hear in this conference, the problem is going to get worse. What's already out there is going to make things much more difficult, and it's our children, it's our grandchildren, it's future generations who are going to face what the problem is. And that's why it's important we turn to the Constitution. Finally, what can you do? Well, I'm going to be trying this case in January 2018 along with Julia Olson, an attorney in Eugene, Oregon, who's behind Our Children's Trust. If you know of somebody, because this case isn't just about what did the government know, when did it know it, but the key question we all have to ask is, why hasn't our government done anything about this serious problem to date? Why the people who were in the prior administrations haven't done anything to date? And we're trying to find witnesses who are prepared to come forward to say, you know, we could have done a lot more. The people who are going to stand up there and say, we could have done more to protect our children. So if you know of those people, please put them in touch with me. I'm going to be here afterwards, and I'd love for you all to keep following our case. If you want to see the pleadings, if you want to see what's been going on or what's going on in the future, the website ourchildrenstrust.org is the way to go. Thank you all very much. And